Good afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon.
No, Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you, Lord. Professor Gardner, I need to correct something I said in a question this morning. We were talking about the SBAR, and the reason I didn't recollect this is it came in a piece of evidence that my colleague dealt with, but Dr. Peters was asked questions about Cryptococcus cases, and she did mention the existence of these cases and the fact they were in the new hospital on the 12th of September last year. So, whilst the other whistleblowers didn't, she did mention that. I've got a couple of questions just before we leave the SBAR, as it were, and your letter sending it to the Director General. You mentioned that you don't support the tone or content of the SBAR. What are you doing to address or correct the behaviour and attitudes that led it to being written in the form it was?
So I have to take time to understand what led people to get to a place where they felt in a position that they believed that was the correct way to write that piece. But there are a number of different elements within this, and that links on to my final letter and the work that we're doing now. So there are systems and processes that need to be addressed. So as you are aware, we have now with RHI, between GGC and RHI, we have sat down together with my Deputy Chief Exec, William Edwards, representing me in that space, with Julie Critchley, Sandra Devine and Laura Emery, to look at developing version 4 of our procedure, which now there is agreement. And that's a much better, and that's a reasonable way forward. That's how it should have been done together. The second element is to have a system by which we can sit down together. So we have instigated weekly meetings, but this time with Julie Critchley and William Edwards present. And at those, Mary Morgan and myself have made a commitment that should any issue be raised in there that cannot be resolved, that we will then set out to aim to resolve it. And indeed it can be resolved.
So just to focus on that particular action point, we'd understood from Miss Imrie that these meetings would be between her and Ms. Devine, but you're saying that actually it's a group of 4.
There's 4. And I think it's really important because we want to try to set ourselves in a different path forward, a path where we are not only just aiming to resolve the issues, but to set ourselves in a way where we can openly discuss some of these elements, understand from some of the flashpoints that have happened, and begin to work forward. But there's different component parts of that. So as I say, first of all, there is version 4. We need to be compliant with the manual, and we also need to be assured that what we are doing, RHI would also recognise as the right thing to do. And I think with version 4, we have arrived at that place.
Would you accept that by attaching the SBAR to your letter, albeit you now explain that you wish you'd explained it more at the time, to some extent you were contributing towards the loss of trust between RHI and GGC?
That was never the intention. And there was dialogue happening, as I said to you already, in the 9 days that go from that letter, 9 working days from that letter to the 5th of September, by the time I'm writing back to Director General. I've met with Mary Morgan, that group has met, we have established V4.
No, I understand that, but if at the time you sent it, I mean, appreciate you've explained what you'd have wished you'd done at the time, but do you accept that it might, to some degree, have been inflammatory to send it without the explanation that you now wish you would include?
I can absolutely understand, and I've noted myself that in hindsight it would have been much better to clarify that. However, there were conversations and there were actions going on around that to try to put it into the right context and framing. But I absolutely understand and acknowledge, as I have already, that a better framing would have been would have been an improvement on the letter as it was written. Absolutely.
Now, you've addressed what steps you're taking to.
If I may,
please.
there are more steps, and they're not many.
No,
so I
yeah,
would
true,
appreciate
yes.
the opportunity to just set them out.
Please.
So there is version 4. There is then the weekly meeting, and the weekly meeting will be Laura Imrie and Sandra Devine, William Edwards on my behalf, and Julie Critchley on behalf of Mary Morgan. And that allows opportunity. So through them, there's been discussion about version 4. That also means that if anything is of concern on a weekly basis, there's an opportunity to discuss it at infection control level. But there's also an issue, so there's also a way where Mary Morgan and myself can be assured that actually we are walking forward and there is nothing in the room that's being left unspoken and not addressed.
I know there are other steps beyond that.
Yes, and so then the other element is that we have also agreed that we will co-commission a piece of work between Mary Morgan and myself to bring together the infection control teams in each of the organisations to begin to do some development work. Now that will need a skilled external support to be able to unpick this. This is not a superficial organisational development type of piece. This is really looking and exploring roles and responsibilities, reflecting back on some of the flashpoints that have caused concerns, and setting out together a new methodology by which we can step forward. So we intend now, we've touched on, and I believe in that group they've touched on, should there potentially, for example, be a version 5 that we agree to together that says if there is an escalation where there is not agreement, what do we do next? So how do we come together with perhaps the help of Ms Critchley and Mr Edwards? And then if it's not resolving and it's a complex clinical issue, which is actually at the heart of many of these elements, how do we bring in then an independent expert to help facilitate that conversation? Because I come back to the points, these are all individual expert professionals in their own right, but what we need to be able to do is have a methodology that gets us to a mutually respectful acceptance of a position that we can go forward with a shared narrative whilst it might accept the elements in both.
Right.
Thank you.
So
Can I, if I may, can I take advantage of you being here really to help my education? You contrast what you've just spoken to by way of organizational development with superficial organizational development. Now, organizational development is an expression we've heard from more than one witness, and I've let it go past me on the assumption that it is of necessity a good thing. But you're identifying superficial organizational development. What do you have in mind by that?
So sorry, no. So I'm trying to say the opposite. So I think this will need to be quite sophisticated. I think we'll need to bring in.
No, I understand that
sorry.
point.
Apologies.
But what I was taking, and if I'm wrong in taking this, is that organizational development is a thing which from time to time organizations just pay lip service to, or we have a day's conference and everyone goes away and just behaves as they've been behaving before. And I was wondering if you have any insight to follow on that, or simply to correct me in my misunderstanding of what you were saying.
I will clarify then, and I'm doing a great disservice to organisational development colleagues in this. But where there are colleagues coming together into, for example, if we bring colleagues together into a conference day to be able to do work on a particular project, but there isn't tension, there isn't significant tension there at the point that you bring them. You may be doing it in team building, you may be talking about positive ways of interacting, you might be exploring ways that you can be more successful and high performing. In this instance, we're going to have to do some very sensitive, very skillful work in addition to that. A first step that really explores respectfully, with dignity, some of the issues that are there that are grittier issues, but through those honest conversations and through that commitment to that work, I think we will get to a different place. So I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used such flippant language as superficial, but what I was really meaning is
I thought you
it
were.
will take
I thought that was quite considered.
it will take quite expert support to do this. I think it will be a number of sessions, and I think we will need to look for evidence that actually it is working for people, and indeed it is bringing about the type of change. We need to be very clear in the objectives. We don't want to be in this position again. We don't want people to feel that they have an opinion and then feel that they are then alienated from their colleagues, and there is no way to bring that consensus position back. So it's a clear methodology that we can use, and actually we have been discussing in GGC, and of course as part of my statement you've referenced other issues that I have dealt with since I came into the role. There are other issues. When you take highly skilled professionals, I'm sure across many other professions, but with expert opinion, at points you will have a clear disagreement on what the best way forward is. Also, when you put in management into that space, again, it can add to that. I think Glasgow wants to move forward with a strong culture where we are genuinely listening to our staff. We're hearing their views of our patients and their families. We're being honest and transparent, and we are giving feedback to people, and we are sharing information more honestly. And to get to that place, I think we need to be intentional. I suspect we may even develop some resource internally where we can deploy the types of resources in a protracted period of time, because I don't think this is one session and it will all be fine, but where you can, for example, give psychological support to individuals, you can allow them to explore on an individual coaching basis, on a team coaching basis, you can use restorative practice, you can use expert opinion. This is a multifactorial approach that we'll explore.
Professor, before I go and ask you some questions about that, I want to just make sure we connect the evidence to the documents.
Okay.
So I'm just going to show you the joint letter, so you just confirm that's the one you're talking about. So that's the joint letter, the 9th September 2025, Bundle 52, Volume 7, Document 51, page 453. And this is a letter that you both sent jointly to Ms. Lamb. And just to connect it to the rest of the evidence, what followed out from this was a series of meetings of the 4 people you've just identified, which produced an SBAR, which has produced a version 4 of the framework, and that has informed these actions that you've just discussed.
Yes, and in addition to that, the point that I should have also made is the fact that with a deadline of the 8th of September to return all information requested to RHI by the 5th of September.
And that was done.
Showing a real confidence and a real commitment to working in a different manner, we have returned all information. And through that weekly meeting, we're exploring to say, is there anything else that's required? So hopefully a very different tone and a very open, committed approach.
Okay, so I'd like to go back to the SBAR. So that's Bundle 52, Volume 5, page 150. The reason I'm doing this is to simply focus on the fact that you have just discussed in considerable detail the steps that you are taking with NSS to address the difficulties in the relationship between GGC's IPC team and RHI. And I'm grateful for that, and we have that, and that's very helpful. I don't think there's any need for actions to take between the GGC IPC team and the public inquiries experts. I'm sure they'll cope fine, so I don't think we mention them at all. But there's a third group in this list, which is the whistleblowers. And I asked you about whether attaching the SBAR contributed to the loss of trust between RHI and GGC's IPC team, and you gave me an answer about that, and I'm grateful for that. But the other half of that question is, given the length of the story around the whistleblowers, that as far as this inquiry is concerned goes back to an attempt by Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster to demit their IPC sessions in July 2015. Could it be that attaching this SBAR to a letter to Ms. Lamb actually creates more distrust between GGC and the whistleblowers?
So I can absolutely understand the point that you're raising, but the actions that follow suggest something different, number one. And number two, I would also put it that perhaps if the Scottish Hospitals Inquiry had put this SBAR to me today and I hadn't raised it transparently with Miss Lamb as an accurate reflection of a piece that was written in November, then that was being less transparent. I accept the points you're making, I absolutely do. And I come back to the point, with hindsight, I think there could have been a much better framing from me in that original letter to clarify that point, but to hide a document that was written.
Well, that wasn't the reason I was asking the question.
No, but that's, I guess, the point that I was taking in sharing it in that regard to the Director General was I wasn't sending it to the whistleblowers. I meant no disrespect to anyone within it, but it was a factual piece that was constructed for a purpose to report to the Chief Executive at a point in time.
So I suspect there will be a debate later in the submissions about whether the steps being taken by RHI and GGC in respect to the relationships between RHI and GGC are the right steps, sufficient steps. Other people will express opinions on that because we have term of reference 9 and many CPs will have views. But let's put RHI to one side and focus on the whistleblowers. In your statement, which if we go to page 53, we asked you a series of questions about the HIS report.
Yes.
And particularly question 2, if you go to page 55, we set out in quite a long question a series of documents, which I'm not going to go to, but they include the press release issued on the day of publication, a paper to the board by you, a press release issued when it went to the board, and a minute which records apologies by you and the chair. And we asked you a series of questions, and you've answered them. Now, I get the impression that you had to investigate, or at least form a view, on whether the conclusions HIS reached were ones that required you to act. Would that be a fair assumption of part of the process that you were going in? You had to read the report and decide what to do next.
Yes.
Right. Now, in your discussion this morning about I asked you about the length of time the whistleblower had been going on, and you discussed it going back to the procurement of the hospital and issues emerging and it being very tense. That seemed to be the context I got from you. Was I right to take that?
Not necessarily whistleblowing. I think just the tension within infection control. I'm not saying whistleblowing from that point in time, but there is tension, and you can see that in the story. Yes.
So I'm going to put to you a few things that could well be facts that this inquiry might decide to reach findings on, but there's certainly material that supports them. There's material that doesn't support them as well, but I mean, just taking these as potential findings. And as we go through them, it occurs to me you could say, yes, in broad terms, I recognize that, or I have no knowledge, or I haven't, or I just don't know. But you could, or I reject it. You could take a broad response to each of them. And I do appreciate that my phrasing of each of them might not be entirely what you think. And I'm not asking to accept whether what I say is true, but just that you're aware that that is a view that is held. And we'll keep it soft in that sense, because I want to ask a question that flows from this. And so we'll try one, and we'll see how we get on. If we think about that summer after the hospital opened, July 2015, it might well be a fact, this inquiry reaches, that Dr. Inkster and Dr. Peters' decision to seek to demit their sessions was motivated in part by concerns about both the management of IPC and the safety of the building. And they didn't feel that the safety of the building was properly investigated at that point. Now, the question is that something you've heard as a view expressed, or is it completely news to you?
It's something I would recognise from points of reading the inquiry.
But not necessarily from anywhere else?
I think it's very difficult to extract one from the other.
I understand.
And so I think I would prefer to note it in terms of my points that I have already raised. I think also we should note factually, as I understand it, again, only from reading elements, that I was not there at that time.
That is a given. We should run that through as a stick of rock through the next 5 minutes. Please.
But that actually, I'm not sure that they actually did. They chose to demit their responsibilities, but I believe that they continue to do.
Well, they were told they couldn't, but that's the evidence. But anyway,
no, but I just didn't want it to be a point in time that it was stopped.
Right. Next one is 2017. Now, at this point, Dr. Inkster is not at work. She's off sick. She's happy to discuss that. So the 3 microbiologists, Dr. Redding is perhaps the leading light of this, send in an SBAR. And there is a meeting on the 4th of October 2017, which results in a 27-point action plan. Now, is that something you've heard of?
Yes, but I'm thoughtful about going back into elements where I can't give an accurate reflection. I hear you acknowledging that point, but I do think the relevance in terms of the quality of what I can share. I recognise that at the highest level from the issues raised within the Scottish
That's all I ask
Hospital
you to do
Inquiry.
at this stage.
Indeed.
We then have a point, which from memory is in February 2018, where Dr. Redding forms the view that there is inadequate action on 5 points in that SBAR and goes to stage 2 in the whistleblowing process. Is that something you're aware of in broad, high-level terms?
Indeed.
Yeah. The water incident happens to start at the beginning of March that year. In May, Dr. De Caysecker produces a stage 2 whistleblowing report into Dr. Redding's whistleblower. And that happens in May of that year. Again, is that something you, in broad terms, are aware of as something that might have happened?
Broad terms.
Broad terms. When Dr. Redding and Dr. Peters, who has helped her to some degree and attended the meeting, see that document, they discover, and this is some years later, that there's criticism of Dr. Peters' professional practice in the document. Is that something you're broadly, at a high level, aware is in the stage 2 whistleblower report?
I hadn't specifically understood that element, but I've understood high-level tensions and issues that people have been concerned about, but I wouldn't have been able to name that specific element.
We then get to the winter of 2018, 2019. There is at some point a point where the working relationship between perhaps Dr. Inkster, Professor Steele, to some extent begins to deteriorate. It's quite hard to pin down when from the 2 of them, but at some point it deteriorates. And we end up in the summer 2018, August, when there is a meeting of the IMT when Dr. Armstrong forms the view that action needs to be taken and Dr. Inkster is removed as chair of the IMT. Now, it's again, at a very high level, and that is a very quick summary, you're aware roughly of that story.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Dr. Inkster resigns as the lead ICD. There's then a discussion about reopening Ward 6A to new admissions. An SBAR is produced by Professor Leonard and I think Professor Jones. And another one by Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster. They take very different positions. And there is a disagreement between those clinicians and others about this issue, which is ultimately resolved by the Chief Nursing Officer a few weeks later opening the ward. Again, at a high level, is that something you're aware of?
Yes, high level, through the inquiry.
Yeah. We then get to lockdown. The stress of the whole system is under the huge pressure of lockdown. And ultimately, Ward 2A reopens. And there is then a question, which I'm not putting higher in the question, about the extent to which that process of validating the reopened Ward 2A has been good enough. And I don't know the answer to that question, but it's certainly a question that is floated around. Again, at a very high level, are you aware that there are people asking that question?
I've heard your question of others.
Now, we then get to the inquiry, and a lot of the views of all these people, including your IPC team, come out in evidence. And it's clear there's not a lot of agreement between many of these people. Again, happy with that as a broad high-level conclusion. And in fact, Dr. Inkster and Dr. Peters and Dr. Redding make some criticism of some people, and Dr. Armstrong makes and others make criticism of them, and there was a cross-criticism in their evidence. Again, you're familiar with that as a broad thing?
I think to agree to these points, my level of knowledge of each of them, you're specifying specific points.
I just want to get. I want to give the impression that when I ask the question, that at least you understand where I'm coming from in terms of setting the frame yet. And the reason I say all this is that, and this is what I'll ask you whether you accept this, that from the perspective of the whistleblowers, they have raised issues about the ventilation and water systems of this building and the way IPC and water testing is done over the best part of, well, nearly 5 years before lockdown. And they don't feel that either they're being listened to or that they're, how can I put it, that it is considered to be valid for them to raise the issues. Now, you might not agree with that perspective on their part, but would you recognise that may well be a perspective they hold?
Yes, I understand the points that you're making in terms of that they feel that they raised issues, that they were listened to but not sufficiently. I think I'm paraphrasing what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And because, and I think I can draw that conclusion because we never really got to consensus. But I think alongside that, I would note, and I know we haven't touched on that here, and it's not for me to give that specific evidence, but efforts have been made in parallel. And I suppose what I would want to just note is that I don't think issues were being raised from what I'm observing. I wasn't there, and I'm not either defending or condoning, because it's a complex picture that I think there's much to be told from within that picture. However, there was scientific experts being brought in to try to help understand the picture through a range and a series of different elements. There was exploration both internally and externally in terms of looking at this evidence. So I recognise the point that you're saying. From what I understand is that people felt they raised issues, they were listened to, but not sufficiently. But I also would want to just acknowledge the fact that I think it would be erroneous to not also acknowledge that there was much work going on in parallel to seek answers.
Just wanted to check, because I may have misunderstood what you said. Conscious that there may well have been reports produced by persons out with that whole debate in 22 and 23. Not aware of any external experts being brought in between 2015 and 2023.
No, so I understand your point in terms of that.
So the reason I'm grateful for your summary there, because it enables me to focus the question this way.
But if I may.
Yeah.
In terms of the role of colleagues as we move through that time period in terms of NHS Assure and RHI, there is debate with the CNO office, etc., about what is right, what is the different elements. So that's really what I'm referring to. There are discussions going on. There's also reports being done. There's air sampling checks being done. There's water sampling. That's really what I'm meaning, is in terms of making sure that there is work going on alongside in parallel to this.
We've had a lot of work reports done. We have the reports done by Mr. Poplar talking about the management of the water ventilation system and his reports about his views on the management.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah. The reason I set out that, which I recognise is a slanted perspective, is this. If we go back to the SBAR, and conscious that you have explained the reason you produced it and what you wish you'd said in the letter when you did so, and conscious of all the work that you're planning to do and have started doing in respect of RHI, how do you propose to address the relationships issues, the potentially somewhat embedded disagreements between those whistleblowers who still work for your organisation and other people within your organisation? Because you haven't yet discussed how you're going to do that.
And that will need to be part of our plan as we go forward in terms of work With RHI will need to be work between GGC and with RHI, and there'll need to also be work within GGC itself. And there may be work within RHI. I can't comment on that relative part, but there'll need to be work within NHS GGC itself. And that's really what I was trying to reference in terms of internal discussions. And I think without going into specifics, because I wasn't there and I wasn't part of them, but you do see flashpoints in these discussions over a protracted period of time, both internal and indeed between GGC and RHI, and that's really what I was trying to reference. So I think there is remedial work that will need to be done to explore different roles, responsibilities, and different perspectives to get to a better space in place.
So I suppose there's a quick question to answer this, and then there's a longer one. The quick question is, since you took up in post, have you attempted to speak to any of the whistleblowers?
No, I have not, because of the Scottish Hospitals inquiry. And it's one of those elements, actually, it's very delicate in terms of knowing what is the right thing to do. I've been trying to understand the different component parts of this. We're working through what is right today in terms of making sure our system is safe. But I think that is a piece that will absolutely have to be addressed as part of this. And I would intend to do so as part of this as we go forward.
I'm conscious that you've described a future set of steps that you intend to take. And I'm conscious that we as the inquiry to some level cause an inconvenience or an impedance to any such process, because we're here asking questions, requesting documents and demanding statements. But from the outsider looking in, it doesn't look like it required much time to decide to issue the acknowledgement and apology in the HIS A&E events. So why is it taking so long to address this one?
I think there's two elements to that. Number one, the Health Improvement Scotland issues related to emergency department were of a much simpler nature than this. This is a protracted, very, very complex situation involving particular patient care issues and indeed the matter of a public inquiry. So rightly or wrongly, I've been more thoughtful about how to address that without in any way being perversive to the course of this inquiry. I didn't want anyone to feel that in any way I was asking something of them in a way that in any way put any discomfort. We will have to consider all the different elements, and we've looked to the inquiry to test much of this and to help GGC to move forward in this respect as well. Whereas the Health Improvement Scotland element, they had considered and they had come up with their recommendations, and so therefore respectfully I didn't approach until after the recommendations came out from Health Improvement Scotland, and then I began a journey to be clear on what and how to go forward. And that may be right or may be wrong, but it was done with genuine good intent.
What that prompts me to do is to ask a couple of technical questions and then pick up and end this section. So the two technical questions are, if we look back at not at the SBAR actually, but your letter, I won't go to it. You mentioned there was a consideration of the Cryptococcus cases in November 2024.
Indeed.
Will you undertake to produce that to RHI and the inquiry?
So this SBAR related to that, and I've asked if there's further documentation, and if there is further documentation, I've not yet seen it, but I have asked.
So when you talked about an assessment being done in November, this is it, the SBAR is it?
Is the product of that. Now there may be further documents, and I have recently asked, should there be further documents? I think they should go into that weekly discussion to start to unpack the cryptococcal
But when
cases.
you were talking and I asked you about the May review, the November one is this SBAR?
Yes.
It is, right, okay. Now this is a question that I've been asked specifically to ask you. In Dr. Inkster's consequential statement, I don't think I need to go to it, which in volume 1 of the part 2 papers is at page 107, 109. She talks at some length about a concern from RHI about the grading at Hyatt Green of 2 cases Cuprivardis in Ward 2A in November 24, and an RHI disagreement about the grading. Have you learnt about this issue?
I have heard about this issue more recently, yes.
What, if anything, are you are you intending to do about it?
Again, through the weekly discussions, I want us to begin to unpack these issues. I also want to explore with our high whether there's other issues that we think, but it's back to the point that I've touched on earlier and Miss Imrie spoke about in her statement. They won't know necessarily what they don't know. I want to explore that to understand how better we have proactive conversations and we feel confident and we have the trust in place that we can explore. I think the ideal situation that we're wanting to get to is where, for example, Glasgow is considering these cases. So if I look to how, as far as I can hear from colleagues, they explored elements in November last year, and there may well be other documents at a clinical level that were explored at that time. I would have thought if you're coming to a point where you're really discussing these, it would be valuable to then sit down with our high and have a conversation about it. And that's where we're trying to get to, so much more proactive.
Now, I've been asked to put it this way. Obviously, you've explained today in some great detail steps you are taking and intend to take in this area. We've had concerns expressed by patients and families and through their legal representatives that they do not yet have confidence that GGC fully reports HIA. So it's not just our high, there's a sort of audience out there as well. Whilst I obviously get the impression from what you're saying that you think these steps will hopefully begin to address the issue with our high, what do you need to do, if anything, to address concern from particularly those patients and families who have experience in the hospital in earlier days when maybe things weren't as they are now?
So I think there are two elements. Element one is again about how we monitor so that I can show and demonstrate assurance in a more public space. And currently we're looking at how at board level we can provide a report on a monthly basis that will show all maintenance elements being shown. We already have the flow up of any testing that's being done through clinical governance, but I want again to bring that into a more succinct report so that people can see publicly at the board level that we are monitoring everything that we should. In terms of the data that's coming from that, again, that flows up through clinical governance, but I want to bring it into one easy place through an integrated performance report that then can be seen publicly at board on a regular basis. And then the final element is the assessment of what we have found, and that then allows scope for further external additional comments to be added within that should we believe that there is any question of uncertainty or further discussion required. So in terms of our hospital today, I have got to go on the basis that I see the reports that show that we are maintaining our estate, that we are monitoring our estate, that includes ventilation and water, including any further mitigations that we have put in place, that we then look at our data on a regular basis and that we then benchmark that data to be assured that we do not have a problem. And that in itself is a very robust process that you would expect to be within any organisation. And I do think we fulfil that. But I think we could be, and again, I think out of this inquiry, I think it would be a really positive element if we could have a standardised way of every board reporting in that way to board level, so that again, you knew that you were compliant, so that if we were, God forbid, sitting in a situation, again, maybe not an inquiry, but you're sitting somewhere, I would be able to say, we are fully compliant with a standard set in terms of reporting against maintenance, reporting, assessment, and indeed where there is any potential challenge.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, because you'd appreciate that amongst the council team, we often discuss potential recommendations. And there's often a tension in the conversation, or not tension, there's two perspectives that we sort of bounce ideas back and forward. And sometimes there's, well, we need a new process, we need a new form, we need a new system. That's one perspective. And there are many ideas around to address many different aspects of the subject of this inquiry that broadly form into that group of steps. But the response to that is often, well, that's fine, but actually you want an organisation which its culture is about that sense of internal challenge of questioning. And so But then, of course, if you push that too far, it boils down to a recommendation that everyone should behave and not make foolish decisions, which is, of course, not a very helpful recommendation. So do you see the issue that having a new system and all the systems you've described does ultimately turn on the culture of the organisation?
I hear the point that you're making, but actually whether the Scottish Hospitals Inquiry suggests that this is put in place for every organisation across Scotland in a standardised way, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde will continue to report as we're doing today, and indeed we will enhance our reporting so that it is clearly all in one place. The reason I was making the point nationally, and we will be raising this with RHI as a potential positive that could come out of not just the work with Glasgow, but actually more broadly, is it then lets members of the public look at Glasgow's data versus Board X or Board Y. It is a way of reading across, because when you go into data sources, we know that it can be very confusing. And to give people assurance, I'm going to be treated in this hospital. And I think, I've said it already, but 2015 to 2025 is hugely different as an organisation. The landscape has changed. NHS Assure has come into play, whistleblowing standards, duty of candour, and indeed the very, very, very significant learning from
duty of
this
candour
inquiry
was in place when this incident happened, and you had a whistleblowing policy in place. These aren't new things, Professor Gardner.
Yes, but I think the standards that are there now and how organisations...
So there's a change, I understand that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is it's not a static piece. I think we have continued, but actually the learning from all of this, we have changed our systems and our processes. We've been more diligent. We have increased the number of times we both maintain or we test different elements within our system, again, to provide more robust assurance. So what I was trying to say is Glasgow takes the culture of internal scrutiny very seriously. Internal scrutiny and assurance is absolutely at the very top of my own responsibility, and I think the board is doing that. It doesn't need the inquiry to say that. I was trying to put forward that I think being able to look across a landscape could enrich in that. But actually out of this, we will continue to step back and take all of the recommendations and again move forward further.
So I appreciate that you have these steps in mind and these changes to the way governance works and insurance works. Can you help us about the extent to which, putting aside issues within the IPC team and the issues in the ward and all on the water system, all the technical sides, just thinking about board level governance, to what extent has board level governance scrutiny, challenge, questioning changed in GGC since 2020, and how can the public be sure that it has changed?
Yeah, so in this regard, I would like to make reference to the paper that was attached to my statement.
So that's bundle 50, page 73.
And if I may, I would like to speak particularly about what I have recognised within 2025 and the work in terms of now. If I may, I also would like to just clarify the point. Whilst I'm making further recommendations for the steps that we will take, I want to be really clear that the governance that is in place today and the scrutiny that is in place today tests and assures us of these issues that I've already set out.
I understand that, but
I just didn't want to leave an ambiguity.
How's it changed since 2020 to today?
So what I'm saying is in this paper, we are describing different elements. So if I can go to the page again with the governance structure, which is page 7 of that document.
So that's page 79.
Yeah, so we can see that we have at board level, there has been the establishment of the People Committee that is looking very much at the cultural issues and is challenging and digging into different elements around all aspects to do with our patients. That is around feedback from patients, it's around feedback from staff, it's around whistleblowing. The Audit and Risk Committee is looking at all reports on our whistleblowing. We now have a Speak Up campaign in place. Again, any elements linked to the Speak Up campaign where staff can come forward and raise issue will be heard through the People Committee. Through our reporting back from patients in terms of any incidents and closing out of complaints and so on. Again, I think there is a more robust challenge in around that, but the People Committee wasn't in existence at that time. And if we look down in terms of then the next layer down, we have the Inquiry Oversight Subcommittee, which is looking at all elements of the inquiry to make sure that we are being...
But we'll be gone. So that doesn't solve the long-term problems.
No, but excuse me, but it does allow us to, it does allow us right now, while this is a piece in motion, to be addressing the points and making sure that we're placing them into our core governance. I think we've taken a much more agile approach to governance. If you go down a layer further, again, we have, if we just look to even the cluster, which is around the executive oversight.
So we zoom in on figure 2, please.
Yes, thank you. That's down into the pink areas on the left-hand side of the screen. So we've established the Executive Oversight Group for Transforming Together and the GDC Way Forward, which includes the work that we've done in and around the A&E department. We now have a non-exec who sits on that group. That wouldn't be normal practice. This is an executive group, but we brought further scrutiny. Health Improvement Scotland is also sitting on that group, again, to help continue to be an external challenge to us, and the Centre for Sustainable Delivery. If we go down in terms of the portfolio group and that oversight group, again, another non-exec. And it's not just sitting on that group. Sorry, that's if we go down to the GGC Way Forward, the whole system oversight group. And this is
So that's on the next page, is it? No?
Same diagram in the pink, one layer down.
Oh, yes. Yeah, right, yes.
So this was looking specifically at the Health Improvement Scotland elements and really unpacking those, but that means that non-execs of the board are also out and about, they're meeting staff and at that group, and then at the following group that sits above it are hearing and seeing from staff the issues that they are raising and indeed challenging us in terms of whether we're closing out. So in totality, we have walkabouts from our non-execs. Our non-execs are engaging much more on a proactive basis in our board setting and in our committee setting. The chair is encouraging, again, more stimulated discussion and challenge of the executives in that space. And so we are looking to explore different elements, but it also means that they are doing so in our strategic elements from a very informed position where they've actually been sitting in the meeting live and can give feedback to colleagues on their experience of sitting within that new pink area. So from this is into the executive, going up to corporate management, and in figure 1, the element that where I started, we then have enhanced focus in and around our scrutiny of in and around people, meaning patients and staff.
So perhaps I suppose the thing to, before I move on to your statement and a couple of other issues, take that off the screen. This paper was produced last week to the inquiry. I mean, sure.
For the inquiry,
to the inquiry, yes.
Not to the board.
Not to the board. We issued our PPP 15, which dealt with governance issues up to and including October 2010, a full business case. A little bit more after that, but it basically stops then in June, possibly May, now that I think about it. Am I right in thinking, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that this structure, these evolutions that you're describing are very much the product of this calendar year?
Yes.
Right.
But prior to that, and I can only comment as an observation, the alignment was with the NHS Scotland Blueprint for Good Governance, and the committees and standing committees were as per other boards in that regard. But I can't speak to the active nature of governance. Governance is a piece that we can look at in structures, but actually when you're embedded within it, you can get a very clear sense of whether there is very active, agile governance within that space where people are being openly challenged, they feel able to speak up, and you're providing the board with the relevant information on a timely basis in a simple way of describing, but with enough detail that they can scrutinise to be really effective. And that's an area that we're strengthening this year. And I think it's right that I speak to this phase of governance. It is difficult for me to comment on how actively, as I wasn't part of that board.
Well, I appreciate that, but I mean, I suppose the problem with the question that's sort of forming in my mind is that we've had a lot of evidence about 2009, 8 to 2015, the procurement of the hospital, then after that, the DMA Canyon reports, and there seems to be, as we discussed at the very beginning of this discussion, some issues then around reporting up through the system, decisions not being reported to the board committees, not appearing in minutes. And no real hint that non-executive members have any awareness of what's going on. For example, there's a statement by Mr. Lee, who's just one non-executive director who very helpfully provided the statement. I don't think it's unfair to say that he was not aware of the problems that were going on around the specification of the ventilation system in the hospital, as indeed when Professor Steele came, he couldn't work it out. So in the past, there's been a lack of challenge and reporting. And so effectively, is it your position that this paper summarizes the actions that you're taking in this last, what is it now, 8 months, 9 months, to bring about a real change in these things?
With the chair of the board,
Yeah,
the chair of the board is obviously responsible for these elements, but I'm responsible to provide proactive information in a way and to be transparent and to encourage and work closely with the non-execs to ensure that they have transparent access. But I do believe that what I see from my own experience and indeed working with my executives, I have developed, I can only comment on those elements, but the structure that I put in place around my weekly executive, around the corporate management team, using data and analysis each week, using a tighter set of papers in terms of decision making, etc. All of that is in my tenure, and I can't comment on that. However, what I can comment on is I believe that there was areas that required to be strengthened.
To what extent does your inability to comment on previous events place you in the position where, because you can't know if something went wrong, or you can't acknowledge if something went wrong because you don't know, that it makes it hard for you for the organisation to move forward if it doesn't understand what it's moving forward from?
I think if I don't have full understanding in terms of being able to represent accurately what happened at that moment in time, I don't think that stops me from taking a strategic overview of circumstances. I have diligently tried my best to understand what is a very, very complex journey, understand the pertinent points, and I have to trust my executive. I challenge and I ask them questions so that I can build up a picture. I've worked with the chair of the board and non-execs again to build up a picture of knowledge, and I've looked at expert advice. So I've got to use all of those elements to try to get a position today based on that journey. So I don't think it precludes me, but it gives a responsibility to me to go back at points and either query the data or indeed to look at the recommendations, for example, from this inquiry, or indeed to seek, for example, the work that we're going to do with RHI as a way of resolving in areas that I don't have that expertise. But I think the commitment that I am showing is to try to understand the best I can, to be respectful to those who have endured stress and distress during this period, and that is notable. Nobody wants to be in this place, and to do all that I can to make people, to give people assurance that our hospital is safe today because of the data and the standards and the information that we have, and indeed the commitment by the organisation to deal with issues in a timely manner as we go forward.
Thank you. I want to look at a particular answer in your questionnaire. So we go to the page 53. Of the statement bundle. This is back to the HIS review, but do you see how you've summarised the bottom half of the page, the HIS review and related issue? And it's a very brief statement, but at the bottom of the page, you said, external escalation of these issues by staff who were frustrated by the ongoing issues they felt were not being adequately addressed. Now, I think you explained a few minutes ago over a relatively short time period, but you said this here. And over the page, we'd ask you whether there are any parallels and between their experience and the whistleblowers involved in this inquiry. And you've responded, there are significant differences both in relation to, firstly, the actual issues raised by the ED consultant, those raised by Dr. Reddings, Peters and Inkster, and secondly, the executive leadership at the point of the HIS review. Now, if I misunderstood correctly, the HIS review is covering events that took place under the same executive leadership as these events.
Yes, but sorry, I'm not.
But the review comes in afterwards.
Indeed, the review comes in, and at the point that we are beginning to do this work, there are a number of key changes.
Okay,
That's what I was noting.
And then you say, while I'm unable to comment on the decisions and actions at that time, on the basis of the information I have seen on these matters, there would appear to be some parallels in relation to leadership and culture. I think it's only fair to ask you, what are these parallels?
Yes, so I think first of all, apologies.
With apologies for interrupting again, can I encourage you perhaps just to speak a little more slowly? I have
Sorry.
a challenge with noting, but as ideas come very, very quickly, I have a problem with sort of absorbing the information. So can I encourage you to speak just a little slower?
Apologies. So in relation to the parallels, I think first of all, we've got to, or I see the parallel between whistleblowing and the issues being raised external to the organisation. I think any organisation has got to look to itself when issues are being raised by its workforce where they may have been listening to them. And I think in both instances, you can see actions or attempts to do things, but they are not sufficient to satisfy the people who have concerns. And I think that's the first concern, is that there are people within the issues that we've been discussing over the past few hours, and there are also issues within the emergency department where they believe that they have been raising things to executive level and they are not being sufficiently addressed to their satisfaction, and they have to go external to the organisation. I think that in itself, the fact that people can't be heard in their own organisation and have to either whistleblow or indeed go to Health Improvement Scotland or any other, shows some level of failing of us as an organisation, that we have not been able to adequately support our staff to raise points and to be heard to a level that is satisfactory. I think acknowledging the point that we may not always come to a consensus, but that there has to be a process and a methodology by which people can feel they have exhausted the issues that they needed to have fully considered.
Thank you. I'm hesitating to ask this question because it feels like pulling at a thread that we've already discussed, but I was thinking about as you were talking about the failure to come to a consensus. Now, I know there are times in this saga that we have investigated where there is no consensus. Mm-hmm. I suppose in many ways they happened in 2019. But in 2018, there was a consensus. And when we asked Dr. Armstrong and other of her colleagues whether the issues raised in that 2017 SBAR were wrong, we didn't hear, yes, they're wrong, and for these reasons. My impression was we received acknowledgement, albeit not particularly loudly stated, that the issues raised were broadly accurate around the ventilation and water testing and things. So does it make a difference to the impact on a whistleblower if they're raising an issue and no one's actually telling them they're wrong? They feel they're not being listened to.
Yeah, so I'm not suggesting that by reaching consensus and saying you're right or you're wrong, that is only part one. Part two must be that you're feeling that you are part of an action, that you have a voice and that you are empowered to be able to see it to a fruition, an end point that is acceptable to all. And that's really where I'm meaning in the consensus point as well. So at the end of it, if I go to the emergency department, for example, we set up the NHS GGC Way Forward programme to let them be part of it. They are the co-chairs of each of the groups. Those who raise points sit as part of that process, and they are actively working with us to resolve. Today, we haven't resolved all the issues because they are an issue of demand in our system and complex set of circumstances, but they actively have a voice and we are actively supporting them in the issues they are raising. So that is a thing. And then to the side, there is a separate part, which is that there is the human factors element, supporting people in how they're feeling. giving them the ability in the emergency department, for example, we have brought in an external facilitator who's taking the time to listen to how they're feeling. Some of them have asked for external psychological support. So it's two component parts. One is about the things that will fix it, that they will get to a place where they feel we are satisfied. They may not get to the point that is everything they want, but over here, there's also the human factor. So coming back to your point that you are raising, it's not just about acceptance of yes or no. It is then that we are saying to someone, and I'm now empowering you, I'm giving you the ability to be part of the journey now to get us to the best place possible.
Just have a moment.
So, in the risk of just saying back to Professor what you've just said to us, you would see as part of a proper reaction on the part of the organization, specifically GDC, to whistleblowing criticisms, concerns, to be involvement of the whistleblower in the action which the organization decides to take, assuming that the organization decides to take an action.
Yes, and I think it's not just the whistleblowers. I think it's the point that I was trying to make earlier as well, is that it's both the whistleblowers and others in that landscape to try to help everyone move forward together. Because the real risk, I think, in whistleblowing, or indeed in colleagues coming forward even in another space, is that they end up almost dislocated from part of the service. I'm not saying necessarily individuals here, but then you lose some of that professional group harmony because we're not working through things together. There is a view here and there is a view there, and then that never leads to a positive working environment for anyone. You want people to come into work feeling fully supported and feeling that actually, because whistleblowing or indeed opinion is very rarely a static point. It comes, I may have something to say today, but actually next week I've maybe got a point on something else that I want to raise. And we need to create the conditions whereby I feel safe and I feel supported to be able to speak up next week about this other issue, rather than being in any way held back by the fact that I raised something and people didn't listen to me properly and didn't let me be part of a solution. So therefore, can I raise another thing? And that's a more generic point I'm raising, but it is part of what the approach I think you need to take to resolve.
Now, what I would take from that is that it would not be a satisfactory response for the organization faced with specific concerns to say, we know about that, we're in the process of doing something. That would not be satisfactory.
I don't think that's how you should go forward. I think you've got to engage people and allow, because also when people have raised a thing through, for example, whistleblowing or going externally, they must feel very passionately because they've had the courage to come forward and raise a point that is difficult. And it takes a great deal of courage to do so. And I've reflected that to colleagues in the emergency department. So it's not going to dissipate quickly by somebody just giving a brief. It's fine. You've got to help people have the opportunity to genuinely work through what they feel passionate about, to help them work through with the organisation how we resolve those matters so that they feel assured and they feel listened to and they feel that actually the points have been addressed. They may have been influenced during that journey to get to a different endpoint, but they have had proper opportunity to be part of that resolution.
Thank you.
So, Professor, I've got one final document to put to you before we move to the final topic. So this is Dr. Redding's statement to the inquiry, which is in the bundle of evidence for the week commencing the 2nd of September. A statement is document 2, but we're going to page 135. Now, Dr. Redding gave evidence last year. This statement, I think, is dated from earlier that year. So that's Dr. Redding's statement, witness bundle, week commencing the 2nd of September 24, and it's volume 3, and it's page 135. It might take a moment.
It's not on my screen.
No, it's not. I'm
Okay.
watching my colleague's furrowed brow behind you. So it's the Glasgow 3, Volume 3 statement bundle. It's the first document on the document list. While that's coming up, I'll read it to you. Paragraph 212. During the whole process, there was no recognition or understanding of the stress experienced by the whistleblowers. We were treated as troublemakers throughout. I thought of giving up on several occasions. I promised my family that I would give up after stress resulted in my admission to coronary care in April 2019. This is a promise I later broke, because I found it more stressful to stand back and do nothing, given the harm I believed had been and was being caused. I took a Hippocratic oath, which includes taking prompt action if you think patient safety is being compromised. This is what I believe I was doing. Do you accept, on behalf of the board, that in the past it has not recognised or understood the stress experienced by, in this case, Dr. Redding, who I think might have been your first female microbiologist ever?
So I can recognise the stress and distress that must have been felt by Dr. Redding coming forward, raising a piece and linked very much, without regurgitating the piece that I've just noted, without having that opportunity to channel through to a point of completion the issues I'm sure that caused. And I've read that statement. And again, I would draw parallels to comments that have been made by the emergency department colleagues as well, where they have felt enormous stress and distress by raising something and not feeling that they were part of it. So what I would say today is, as the board, we are being very clear that that is not what we're trying to do today, because and that's the important bit, because we recognise that it's not good enough for our staff, that we need to be able to do the two elements that I described: to support staff, to listen to them, and to make them part of the resolution of a problem so that they have that opportunity. Because, as Dr. Redding noted about having taken the Hippocratic Oath, it's linked very much to the comments that came from the emergency department colleagues. They felt that absolutely compelling responsibility to patients to be able to resolve an issue that was troubling them to a level that they felt compelled to raise it. And again, I repeat the piece that I think it takes great courage to do so. And the board, I think, has today been very, very clear that this is not the way this organisation wants to go forward. And Glasgow 2025 is being very, very clear in noting those points in terms of a way forward.
Have you had to say that? It prompts me to ask this question. Do you consider that in any way Dr. Redding is owed an apology by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde?
I think exactly as I said around the emergency department colleagues, and again, I note those parallels absolutely for those involved in this, acknowledging that they were very different circumstances. Again, I think it is, I am sorry that individuals did not feel listened to by the organisation, were not treated in a way that allowed them to feel empowered and to be able to be harnessed onto a solution, and were not afforded that opportunity. I think it's a complex landscape where it is our responsibility to understand different perspectives and to take time to really unpack, but also to help colleagues come together to find the best way forward. And I don't think from my observation that while some efforts were made, that was fully afforded to those individuals. So on that basis, I am sorry that they were not, that she and others were not afforded that opportunity. And today, I think through my actions, in 2025, I have demonstrated genuine commitment and humility in that space to say we need to do better for the people who come to work every day to do amazing things for our patients, because our patients deserve our staff to be in the best place, and we have amazing experts in our system, and we need to look after them, we need to look after our patients, and we need to look after the families. So on that basis, I'm not trying to protract my point, but it is really important that that is our big why. And if we care about our patient safety and we care about our staff, then I am sorry that they didn't have that opportunity.
Would you extend that to all three authors of the 2017 SBAR and Dr. Inkster?
I think to anyone who has felt within this process, and it may well go beyond, I think the people who would say they felt stress and distress will probably go beyond those who have raised these points.
I mean, obviously, I put Dr. Redding to you. You
Yes.
said
Yes.
people in a collective.
Yes.
Would you include those?
Yes,
four? Okay,
absolutely.
right, okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'd like
In
to.
that regard, but if I may, it does extend beyond that, because I do think if I look to the emergency department in not providing opportunity for those who had the courage to speak up, there were many others on that landscape that we had to address their issues, and we're beginning to unpack a more complex picture. So you have to take time, and we obviously, despite all the efforts that people believe they took, we needed to do more or we wouldn't be where we are today.
Really a point about the use of language. What council put to you is whether GGC should or in fact does apologise to Dr. Redding. Now you replied using the expression, I am sorry. Were you distinguishing I am sorry from I on behalf of the board apologise, or were you not?
On behalf of the board, I would need to reference to the chair and to the board. It would be wrong for me to speak on that behalf today. But I think if I can reference to the board and to the chair, has clearly made these points in and around the emergency department elements. And when the chair, Leslie Thompson KC, and myself made those points in public, we made the generic points as well as the specific points to those individuals. So in terms of people having to go outside the organisation, I think those points stand. But I think as a point of absolute correctness, that is required to be clarified. But I say today, on behalf of the organisation, as Chief Executive and current accountable officer, I can speak to say I think we can do better for our staff, and I'm sorry that they didn't have the resolution from this. But I do also want to acknowledge, because it would be erroneous of me not to, that there are many, many other people in this landscape who have been through this journey, and I think we owe it to them to begin to work forward and have resolution in how we go forward. That doesn't mean, if I may though, it doesn't mean that today we are not taking all steps to ensure our organisation is safe and effective and we're treating people with dignity and respect. But I do think we have something to do to restore some of the hurt and anxiety that has been created.
Thank you. I want to move on to a final topic, which is the topic of the case notes review. Now, obviously, when the case notes review came out, presumably you would have been in NHS 5 in the middle of the pandemic, and so you wouldn't have read it at the time.
Yeah, so the case note review, sorry.
So what I'm asking is, have you read the case notes review overview report?
Yes, I have.
You have, right.
Yes, I have.
Now, I want to emphasise that what I'm about to ask you is not set out in order to suggest the inquiry does not have to consider all evidence it has heard about the question of whether there is not or is a connection between infections and the environment. We will consider all the evidence. It's more to do with, well, in a sense, governance. So we asked a series of questions of Ms. Grant and Mr. Call and she explained that she'd had a handover from her predecessor, and you mentioned that at the beginning of your evidence. when you had your handover from your predecessor, did she give you any handover on the question of whether GGC accepted the conclusions of the case notes review on the question of whether there was a connection between the hospital environment and any of the 118 infections suffered by 84 children in the Schiehallion unit?
That was never part of the specific handover. However, I have read the board paper associated with it from 2021.
Yes. So that's the board paper of the 27th of April 21,
Yes.
which is bundle 37, document 58, page 1068. Now, I want to check, did you read this before we put it on your documents list?
Yes.
Right. And its associated minutes, which we'll come to in a moment. Now, this is a paper produced by Ms. Grant. You've read it. Would you accept that it doesn't explicitly state whether the board accepts or rejects the conclusion on infection link? Or do you think there's a way of interpreting that's different? In which case, I'm very happy if you take me to the right page and we can look at it. Should we look at the section? Let's go to page... Sorry, carry on.
I would say that my understanding of it from as I have read it, it is, and again, I go back to the case note review perhaps just for a moment, if I may,
Please.
to note that what I think came out of that was both a set of recommendations and indeed conclusions based on a level of probability. I have read Professor Mike Stevens' comments around it in terms of in the absence of definitive sources and the strong possibility of a link is undeniable. I think what the board has got to accept in this space, and I think that is what it is doing here, is noting and accepting both the, and I acknowledge I heard your interviewing of my predecessor.
Yes.
And so putting her points to the side, my reading of this is that there is an acceptance of both the recommendations and the conclusions, which are based on probability.
Okay. Now, it's interesting you say that because we can read her evidence and no doubt can think about what she was trying to say. We've also the evidence of Professor Brown.
Yes, indeed.
And he was
definitive
that
yes.
The board accepted the conclusions. Now, if we think about a slight timeline here, this is April 21. We now know from a document produced by Professor Stevens, which we put to Ms. Grant, that for the next few weeks after this, Professor Stevens and his colleagues were still meeting with the parents of some of the families who wanted meetings. And it wasn't finally wound up for a few more days yet after the 27th of April. And then in September, this inquiry held what I think for some is known as the perceptions hearing, or Glasgow 1, in which we heard from families, parents, and patients about their experience. And I wasn't here. I wasn't at the council inquiry, but reviewing these statements, I noticed that of the 32 witnesses, at least 13 parents, and of course some of those are for more than share a child, as it were, they've been told by the case notes review that their child's infection was either probably or possibly connected to the environment. And I suppose that would make a certain amount of sense if you think of the cohort. But then in last year, those parents began to learn through questions being asked and documents being produced through this inquiry that the GGC did not accept the conclusion that there was a link between the environment and the infections, for some of them. In fact, it had it down as 2. Now, has the board ever formally told these parents of this change of position?
So I think for absolute clarity, for my time as accountable officer, chief executive, I have not heard that point. What I hear is a point which is around the case note review, that there was full acceptance of the recommendations and full acceptance of the conclusions based on the categorisation of the possible, probable or more likely. There is no, and noting those points, definitive source. However, the strong possibility of a link is undeniable. I think there's full acceptance of those elements. And I think as proof of the full acceptance, we go on to look at the 15 themes, the 43 recommendations, and the 108 action plan that followed as a result. And we have fully implemented, or for those elements, for example, things like an electronic record that are still ongoing, we are still in the process of implementing. But there was full acceptance. I think that it was, and I presume you're referring then to the HAD report. You may not, but I think it was. Apologies.
I wasn't going to, but please continue.
I think it was reasonable and prudent given the fact that we had not come to a definitive answer on everything. I don't think it is an either or. I think there is full acceptance of the clinical note review. I think what the HAD report, my own opinion on this is what the HAD report, or what Glasgow sought to understand by the Commission via CLO, was to understand in more detail the risk that potentially existed or not. We did not know the outcome of that that piece of work, and I think it's really important to note that until obviously it had concluded, and Glasgow was not involved in that. So I think it was reasonable.
Just a moment. Glasgow, the health board.
The health board
instructed the HAD report.
So via CLO.
No, you're the client.
Yes.
You instructed the HAD report.
Yes.
To some degree, it would seem possible, I only say possible, that encouragement was given to Professor Leonard and Dr. Brown and Professor Evans to review the whole genome sequencing information. A positioning paper was lodged with this inquiry, setting out that, with the exception of 2 discrete cases of paediatric infection, there is no evidence before the inquiry to properly suggest a link between the infection suffered and anything arising from the built environment. That's not the CLO's position. That's the health board's position. And we'll investigate it. My question is this: did the health board tell the parents?
So to my knowledge, no. But also, as coming in as chief executive, that was not the inference that was given to me. The piece that I understood as I arrived was that the case note review, the recommendations and conclusions were fully accepted, and as a result, and as a prudent measure and for safety, we have adopted all recommendations to ensure patient safety, as if all of these are fully accepted. So I think our actions, in terms of the HAD report, I think it was reasonable and prudent to commission as preparation for onward proceedings. I think it was asking the inquiry to test, but it was meant to be around technical assurance of that relative risk. I don't think it was to undermine. That's my own interpretation. I don't think it was in any way to undermine the points around possibility or probability set out in the case note review. If I am wrong in that, and that was of previous individuals, if that was their intent, that was not ever conveyed to me.
So one of the issues that arises is, of course, those 13 parents who gave evidence and spoke about the case notes review did so in September and October and November of 2021. And they've moved on with their lives. Presumably, and I don't know, on the assumption that they'd been told something of weight. There was a possible or probable connection to the environment in their child's case. Now, one of them has produced a supplementary statement, and it will be published, I think, tomorrow. And when one reads Professor Cudahy's supplementary statement, there is a reference to a certain amount of disquiet. He's chosen his own adjectives, so you can read it when we put it in the bundle this week. But do you see how it might be somewhat distressing to the parents of children who were treated at Jahalian to think the issue was for their child resolved, to then discover nearly 2 years later that the health board's position being presented to this inquiry was that's wrong.
So I think in any, and forgive me, because I think in any healthcare setting, you're continuously seeking the best information possible in order to take whatever steps required to be taken to understand the past and to keep the future and the current as safe as possible. Therefore, we use science, and in this particular instance, science never came to a definitive consensus across a range of experts. However, in good faith, we fully accepted, as my understanding, the case note review. I hear the point that you're raising, but I do not believe, I was not there to instruct at the time, so I cannot make comment but I do not believe that the HAD report was commissioned in order to cause distress to families, to undermine a level of possibility or probability, but to more be clear on the relevant risks associated with water and ventilation and ensure that we were taking all adequate steps today and in the future to ensure full safety and to understand where and if and how we had gone wrong. So that is the way in which I have read it. And if families have been upset by that piece, I do understand your point. It must be absolutely horrendous to lose a child or to go through the stress and distress that they have gone through. And that is absolutely awful. And also for all of the staff who have been involved with all of these cases. Again, I go back to the point that people come to do a good job. And so it is awful if despite all of those efforts, a child is lost. It's felt, of course, by the family, but our staff also feel a huge responsibility, and that goes to every level within a healthcare organisation. So we take this very seriously, and there would be no intent, I don't believe, to upset, but I was not there to be able to say what the intent was of the Commission.
I appreciate that. And so the next few questions are I do appreciate that you're slightly at a disadvantage in answering them, but I feel I have to press them. Firstly, you've mentioned at least twice the idea there's no definitive conclusion. Now, I think the word used in the case review is definite, but there is no definite case in the case notes review. You're absolutely right. And the case notes review's 30% is more likely than not the balance of probability, which is, of course, the same standard that this inquiry has indicated it's going to apply. So the fact that there's no definitive conclusion, is that a problem? Does that cause it to be necessary to produce something like the HAD report?
I think in terms of being assured that there is no further steps that we should be taking to provide assurance of safety on a day-to-day basis, I want to be able to give public confidence, and I also sincerely hope out the back end of this that the hospital's inquiry has held people publicly to account and has tested that lets people and patients and families come forward and know that we are providing information, that we have taken and exhausted all steps possible to ensure a safe environment and can demonstrate that through our monitoring. So I think it is within that framing I still make those points. I think to suggest, and certainly for me, and as I say, I cannot speak to the motivation, but for me to think that we would commission a piece of work to be done to understand further, to ensure that we were taking all steps possible as a way of harming or undermining, that feels horrendous to me, because I would hate to have caused further distress to the families who have already suffered a great deal. I don't think for a moment we are challenging possible or probable, but I think you could take it from the other end of the telescope and say, is possible or probable enough for you to be assured that you're taking all the steps that are relevant, and do you need to go further? This was based on 84 children and 118 episodes. The HAD approach came at it, and other scientific approaches may continue to come at this approach. We do on a daily, weekly basis to be assured.
Can I just check something? Have you read the HAD report?
Yes.
Do you recollect that it doesn't at any stage discuss any design features of the water or ventilation system?
Yes, and that's a limitation for sure. And so I'm not suggesting, I want to be really clear, I'm not suggesting that the HAD report replaces the clinical note review. It's quite the opposite. I think these are all different elements. We can go through in this story from the Fraser Montgomery to the DMA Canyon, right through the different elements, including the issues that have been looked at internally as well. There is a whole range of different ways of looking at this, but all of them collectively and individually are trying to create a story. So there are limitations with each of them that we could pick apart, but I think it has been, and today from my perspective, certainly we're looking to try to use the learning from each of these elements in a way to give assurance today.
Thank you. I was proposing in a moment to wrap up for the 10-minute check, but it did occur to me that, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but you have explained in considerable depth and detail in the first 2/3 of your evidence the steps that you have taken and intend to take to address what might be described in very, very shorthand relationships, understanding, trust issues between your own IPC team and RHI, and wider out into the whistle. And then you've made commitments in respect to the whistleblowers in the future. And I hear that. Now, would you accept that it might make it hard for patients and families to trust the board to do these steps, that the board has produced the HAD report and taken the position it did take last year and the year before on infection link? Do you see how the two things might...
I do hear the point that you're leading towards, but I'm trying to be really as open, as honest and as transparent I can about the culture and the standards that we're trying to set for NHS GGC in 2025. I'm trying to demonstrate through this today, which is a tiny snapshot of all of the steps that we're taking to give assurance to the public today and going forward. I do hear your point, but I don't know that I can do any more in giving assurance around the steps that we're doing today. I'm acknowledging your points. I hear your points.
One final question, which is, obviously you're a new chief executive. Your chair is also relatively new. To what extent do you feel confident that you have the support of your non-executive board colleagues and your executive board colleagues to deliver this programme of change you've just described?
I feel very confident in that regard because we've taken a great deal of time. We've done board development sessions with our staff. We've run what we call hackathons, but that's basically sessions to bring people together, to look at problems, to work through problems in a different way, to listen to our staff. We're dealing with specific issues in the GGC way forward. And through our board sessions, informal and formal, we are taking active steps to unpack more information and to be able to provide better ways of reporting so that scrutiny is clearer. We are out and about. I am out and about on a regular basis listening to staff, and there are active visits by the board to the staff, and there you hear and see under the hood directly from people. I also raise on a regular basis, as does the chair, as do other non-execs, again, that break glass that people can escalate, and people have escalated within the organisation to raise points. It's always an effort, especially in an organisation the size of NHS GGC, 42,000 staff members, to change a culture, to set an improved trajectory. But I am trying with the board to be very clear, and I'm doing work with my executive to set out very clear objectives, to set clear standards, to have KPIs that can be measured, and to have assurance statements and assurance and scrutiny opportunities on a more frequent basis. I'm not sure if that was addressing your point.
No, I think it does. My lord, I've got no more questions at this moment for Professor Gardner. Might I take the 10-minute moment to see if there are any further questions in the room? I have one I've already been given, but I will answer it in the block as it comes.
We'll do that. Professor, the procedure we adopt is to give the legal representatives the opportunity to suggest to counsel questions which he might have asked but didn't. So that takes about 10 minutes. So can I invite you to return to the witness room, and we'll be back with you, I hope, within about 10 minutes.
Absolutely. My lord, may I have an opportunity at the end just to make a few comments? Is that possible?
it is possible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. McIntosh, do we have more questions?
Rather a lot, unfortunately.
We have more questions, Professor, but after these have been asked, I will invite you to say what you wish to say.
Thank you.
First question relates to Ward 4B. And that is there any plan to bring the ventilation system on Ward 4B into compliance or into concordance with what's in SHTMO 301 in respect of air change rates and filtration?
So not to my knowledge at this point in time, but I would need to take further advice on that. In regard to where we're at today, I believe the derogations that have been put in place have been considered acceptable, but I would need to take further advice on that one.
Thank you. Now, I need to slightly explain something I said. I talked about the patients and families moving on, and of course, some of those patients and families moved on to stay in the Schiehallion unit.
Yes.
For continued treatment of their children. To what extent does your evidence that to some extent, you might have said we could do better in respect to the whistleblowers, extend to the patients and families as well?
I think it sits at the very heart of all of this, because actually providing the very best service we can to provide that assurance in terms of our tests and balances, to make sure that our checks are adequate, and also to make sure that we're looking after our staff so that when they come to work, they're in the best place. All of that is for one purpose, which is to provide the best care for our patients, and indeed to help our families to feel supported, and also to help our families feel that when they leave a loved one behind and they have to leave them there in the hospital, that they feel confident that we are going to be doing the right thing. So I think it is implicit within everything that I've said.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned in your evidence, the very beginning of your evidence, about the tensions between RHI and the IPC team. Why does the exchange of staff between GGC and RHI cause tensions?
I don't think it's necessarily a direct tension. I was just trying to explain the landscape of there is a mix of people who have been in Glasgow who are now in RHI, and the potential for any relationship complications to continue. But that's an observation, and that's a perception from me, in fairness. And so actually going through this work, we will need to unpack what those real issues are. I think today it's at a much more fundamental level of, I think it often comes from a place of anxiety about sharing and what that will mean and what will happen from a GGC perspective. And also, I think also, again, my perception also comes from a place of people feeling that they have the skills and the expertise and the knowledge locally to make the right call. I don't think genuinely that there is any intention to hide or to not be clear and open. I think they feel that they have done the right thing. But I think in this regard, we need to help people to open up and to share, and hopefully we'll be able to build trust and build those relationships at a higher level. But today it wouldn't be right of me to say specifics, because we need to do the work to understand those further.
So the question I was just asked is much longer, but I'll tighten it down. To what extent and why do you consider a positive working relationship between your IPC team and RHI to be a good idea? Why is it a good idea to have that working relationship?
I think it's a really positive element, because you then have the local position, you have the local expertise, of which there is a significant amount. You have the local information from clinicians, but it means that twofold. One, if there are issues, that may be of concern or of debate, that they can seek external support from others who, again, are very, very skilled. Colleagues in our hire, incredibly skilled. And I think from that skill, they bring two different elements. A further external view, and that different perspective can often help. And number two, the elements that have been spoken about before, from a national perspective, it can bring that national surveillance perspective that actually something that is happening potentially within Glasgow may also be happening somewhere else, and they can bring and enrich the understanding of the issue.
Thank you. You've on a number of occasions mentioned that you have expertise and experts within the current IPC team. Do you accept that the three authors of the September 2017 SBAR and Dr. Inkster are also experts?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear enough in other points. I thought I had, but absolutely, I most definitely do.
Given that the approach of NHS Greater Glasgow in this inquiry has been to say that some of the whistleblowers are substantially wrong in the science, how do you think those whistleblowers are supposed to trust the process you're now planning to implement?
I think the opportunity to explore, and we maybe will learn together and develop a more evolved position on these different elements. I think if you don't explore and you don't have the courage to begin to unpack and seek an understanding of different perspectives, you can't really move forward. And we've got to create the conditions, and that won't be easy, in which to give people the conditions to feel they can trust and they feel they can be supported. I link this back to the point I made earlier. I don't think, and I think at points, we talk about this almost like it's a moment in time, but these are very extended periods of time. Every single day, different types of issues are on the table, and you've got to create the conditions, because to move forward, wherever people are, we want them to feel empowered and listened to, and actually, because otherwise we know clearly that damages people as they go forward in their career, but also that we want them to be able to raise points today. But I just want to be clear, in my expert understanding, I'm not making a comment around the views that have either been agreed to or not agreed to. I think that's for experts to unpack together with the expertise to do that.
I may have misheard you, so I want to just check this. I got an impression when we were talking about steps to be taken that you're planning action now in respect of the our relationship. But I got the impression that you were planning to wait until the inquiry has produced a report before addressing the whistleblowers, or did I misunderstand that?
Apologies. So I think in an ideal world, we would wait until the recommendations. I think it would guide us more. And I think through recommendations, it helps people to feel safer in the route that you're taking. I guess I'm making a connection to the emergency department, for example. It gave us a substance to begin to speak about, but this inquiry and indeed the work beyond this has set out very clear issues that we should start to unpack, and we need to begin to unpack those issues with colleagues now.
I think it's the case that Dr. Peters' evidence was that no one's ever asked her how she's doing, or offered her support other than the support provided briefly in the oversight board by Ms. Copeland. Do you think that's acceptable?
I think if that's the case, that's acceptable. I can't make comment.
That's acceptable or unacceptable?
Sorry, it's unacceptable for somebody not to be given any support. Again, I couldn't speak to the detail of that right now, but I believe that some offers of support were offered at different points to people, and I would need to go back to the reference in that regard. But actually, me debating whether it was or not is not helpful, and I want to be clear on that piece. Going forward, though, I think what is really important is I personally will reach out to individuals, and I will also commit to starting a process where we are listening to people, and we are working through these elements.
So when the oversight board was in place, we had some evidence about attempts at development work done by Professor Walker, but primarily by Ms. Copeland under the oversight board. Would you accept that there might be a measure of skepticism from whistleblowers who've been involved in that before if something similar is offered again, as to whether the health board is genuinely committed to exploring these issues?
I think you can always absolutely come from that perspective and think it won't get better, but a significant number of things have changed in this landscape, and I think we've got a lot of evidence and are able to demonstrate that we are trying in different ways with different groups of staff to move things forward. And I think their reflections, I hope, will help others to be able to see that we are trying different approaches now to be really respectful and to find a way forward.
So I might just get a document ready to open. I'm going to ask my colleague to find bundle 44, volume 1, but I'll ask you another question while he's doing that. We had evidence from members of staff of the health board who might well be the people who appeared to have described in broad terms the whistleblowers as giving misleading or sensationalist evidence. What are you planning to do to create change in that area?
Sorry, could you?
So we've had
reframe your
evidence
question
in the inquiry from members of staff who are currently still in post, not just in IPC,
Yes.
who, in very much shorthand, have described the whistleblowers as being either misleading or motivated not by patient care or exaggerating things. What will you do to address the lack of trust in processes that will probably be caused by the whistleblowers?
So I think there's a number of steps in that regard. I think from a leadership point of view, for me, I've got to set out very clearly that people need to treat one another with dignity and respect, and that actually in speaking about that way about colleagues is unacceptable. It's not right that that should have ever been written in that SBAR, and it's not right that people should be making these comments. So I think we need to invite people to do so constructively, but we've got to set out the rules of engagement to begin with and invite people in to that respectful place and to acknowledge how we will look after them as we invite them into space. And we're going to have to be very, very clear about that, be clear about how any conversation would be facilitated, and be clear on what we're asking people to do with us. And I think through that clarity, we can create, I hope, at least a place where people feel able to speak about different elements in a different way. But we will also have to ask them. So in the emergency department, again, we had to ask people what they needed in terms of the conditions in order for them to be able to come forward, in order for them to be able to start to work forward. And it took time and patience to be able to work through that, because what I might perceive as being important may not be relevant to them or important to them. So that's the step one.
With the emergency department, is that still a work in progress, or is that effectively concluded now, the work?
No, it's still a work in progress. The GGC Way Forward have made some significant movements in that regard. In fact, we've had an external individual in working with the team, and we just had a follow-up meeting. So we are making real progress, but it takes time to turn around issues that have been of a significant depth of feeling for people to raise these issues. And some of those are the issues of the system, and some of those are the issues of relationships. I do think we have moved on significantly, and I think people would reflect that we have supported them in that journey to do so, but it's still a work in progress.
You mentioned the Speak Up campaign.
Yes.
How do you think the way that GGC and its submissions and its staff in evidence have addressed the whistleblowers in this inquiry has encouraged or discouraged people to whistleblow in your organisation?
I don't think you would say, if we look to the historical elements, that it would encourage people. I think the conditions that we're trying to set out, and indeed the Speak Up campaign, giving different levels of people that you can approach, and indeed a really open, robust approach with a whistleblowing champion on the board, reports up to our audit and risk committee of the board. We are creating both pathways and governance around it in order to assure people to go forward. I don't think historically there has been the ideal conditions either in GGC or sometimes in other organisations. So I think we need to absolutely acknowledge it has not been right in the past. And I think people would say they've come forward and they haven't got to where they had hoped to get to. And so all I can say again is reiterating the evidence of what we're trying to do in the ED and other areas, I hope begins. But building trust takes time. And giving people the proof that actually the words that you're saying actually are being converted to meaningful change takes time. And so we're committed to doing that, and I've tried to set out on that journey, but I do think it will take time, and we'll need to prove ourselves to those who wish to come forward as we go forward.
You mentioned in evidence, talking about the HAD report, that the purpose of that was to confirm whether all steps were being done to ensure safety.
Yeah.
Have you read the letters of instruction to the authors of the HAD report and what they were actually asked to do?
I've looked at the high level commission, yes.
Well, let's go to Bundle 44, Volume 1, Document 4, which is the letter of instruction to Professor Peter Hawkey on the 21st November 2022. Now, if we step through the letter and look at the appendix questions, page 242, what I'm effectively putting to you is that in this document, which unless you read it before, it wasn't on the document list, what I'm asked to put to you is that the report was not instructed on the basis to see whether all steps were being taken to ensure safety, because the authors weren't asked to consider what steps were being taken. So they couldn't report on that topic.
Yeah, so perhaps my framing of that point was clumsy. This is really assuring us of are our systems safe?
It doesn't do that either. There's no evidence in this report about systems. But
it is the questions that are being asked. So I thought that's what you were saying is around, are our water systems sterile? Is there evidence of that, etc.? So that's how I've taken it.
I think it's important to explain, no one thinks water systems are sterile. So the question here is, what constitutes a contaminated water system? If there was contamination, how would you see it? That's the question, in essence. There isn't a question, is what we're doing sufficient, adequate, a proper response? That's not the subject of this report.
No, sorry, but in terms of my point, I wasn't, as I said, perhaps clumsy, saying that they were being asked that, but that we were assuring ourselves of what was a problem in our systems, and then that would allow us to move forward with further action.
Okay. Can I show you? I need to put to you. I read to you, but I need now to. I've been asked to put to you paragraph 3 of the second positioning paper from April 2023, which is Bundle 25, Document 9, page 345. So this is what I read out to you in a question, but it's been suggested I put this to you directly. So if we zoom in to the third paragraph of the executive summary, it is the position of NHS GGC that the built environment of Queen Elizabeth did not, on a proper reading of the available evidence, expose patients to any increased risk to their health, safety or well-being. Further, with the exception of 2 discrete cases of paediatric infection, there is no evidence before the inquiry to properly suggest a link between infections suffered and anything arising from the built environment. In particular, there is no evidence to demonstrate any increased rate of infections within Queen Elizabeth from microorganisms related to the built environment. Is that still the board's position?
So I think that's an aggregation. I'm not sure that that's the most accurate way to describe those different elements of expert opinion. But it does align with the elements of the HAD, but it doesn't make reference enough to the case note review and the possibility of the infections as set out in the case note review, which would suggest that there is an issue in relation to infection. So I think the clarity of that is to unpack both the elements from the case note review and the elements from the HAD report. I don't think either of them come to a clear position, and so I think there is a piece around restructuring that because I don't think it's clear enough in the different elements. Okay. I don't think anything scientifically has come to a clear end point in a definitive way, and so I think it's much clearer to define the different elements from each of the external pieces that have been put together.
Right. I'd like to ask a question about communications. Quite a long question. I don't know whether you'd accept this premise to it, which is that some of the documented challenges and perceived shortcomings in the relationship with the parents relate to communication strategies, and that's part of an ongoing loss of confidence amongst patients and families. And I wondered, what specific steps are you taking to rebuild trust through communication, particularly around transparency, empathy, and responsiveness in engagement with parents and family, in terms of the way that communications happen between their board and its patients and families, particularly in the Shadowland unit, but also more widely?
So I think, first of all, there is real learning from the communication. I think we would be clear that there were opportunities for us to have done better in communicating with the families. I think it's a difficult piece that people tried to communicate in an effective way, but I don't think it was achieved at times. I think information came out before families had been told. Sometimes that is, I think, sometimes a misfitting of trying to make sure things are fully approved or fully agreed, but it doesn't really matter. What led us to that point, the communication with the families, there is no argument, was not good enough at that time, and there is much learning. We've tried to build in that learning, and that's still part of the people committee, looking at how our families, and we've done further work to understand from families and patients how they want us to communicate with them. And we're trying actively at the moment, again, with the new people committee that's set up through the board and through the work of the executive, trying to understand, better today what we can do and how to change the tone of our communication and the frequency of our communication to let people know what is happening.
I suppose the follow-up question would be, given that some of the senior communications, those involved in communications from a senior level in the board, are the same people who were involved in the communications in 2018 and 2019, that is the subject of that question, how do you intend to address any learning that's required there?
So as an executive team, we are learning around this. We have done sessions with the executive and with the board to talk about our communication approach. So whilst individuals, there are a number of executives who still are in place. We are a new executive team formed by the fact that a number of key changes have happened. We've got a different approach. We have a different commitment, and we are together challenging one another in terms of how to go forward in an effective way. We're looking at the different strategies. We've been critical of ourselves to understand and to note where we think we've gone wrong and how we may do better as we go forward. So there is live work, again, proactively and reactively, and the executive having open, honest discussions about this. And for me, in direct conversations with my own executives individually about what I expect of them in this regard.
And before, I think my final question is this. It's sort of phrased colloquially to try and sort of get the point across. You've talked a lot about work that's been done this year and what you intend to do and how the executive and the board have been learning. It's a big task, 42,000 employees covering probably half the country in some senses. how would you assess the prospects of you succeeding?
I think we're fully committed and we have a strategy to begin to unpack this. I don't think everything is fixed in a day, but we've set out a very clear new route forward. It was quite brave for me, even coming straight into an organisation in honesty and taking on the issues of the HIS review and being out there in a vulnerable space, being open and honest with staff, with absolute humility, listening to their points of view. So that is a starting point, and that's not ideal in year month one. So I've tried, though, to be sincere in my approach with my executives. We are absolutely committed and we take time to really understand what it is we're trying to achieve, and we're very, very clear on who we're achieving it for our patients and for our staff. Our people are absolutely our number one priority. So I can set the tone. I think my executive team are fully supportive of this, and they can amplify that. We are also then aligning with the board, and the board is very active in this space under the chair of Dr. Leslie Thompson, KC, and indeed the new non-execs and existing non-execs. They're becoming much more involved in our work, and we have, I would suggest, more agile and indeed more challenging discussions around getting it right for people. So through all of that, you've got to start somewhere. We've set out a bold pathway. I don't think it's unrealistic, but it will take time to build back from a period that has not been good in the history of NHS GGC, and we want to build back strongly. And we have strong, ambitious plans. I think if we called us...
This may be the point where if you want to move
Apologies.
into your couple of remarks, that may be something to do now, and I might come back to you depending on what you say.
Okay, thank you. So I think, thank you, and thank you, my
Please,
lord.
please do.
I want to note the incredibly important role that Scottish Hospitals Inquiry has in this space in a really difficult landscape. And I'm very grateful for the fact that in that public domain, there is that opportunity for you to be holding in public, holding us to account, responsible officers and experts testing the evidence and so on, and letting the public see everything in this journey. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to acknowledge the stress and distress for families and for staff, and of course specifically the whistleblowers within that staff group. We are a different organisation in 2025. I've made that point before. I cannot strongly emphasise that enough, because we are listening, we are learning, and we have the courage to do better. And we are absolutely committed to doing so for the people we serve. We're diligent, we've got humility, and we are not being complacent. And that's why I believe that we will succeed. We provide incredible services for those that we serve. The clinical things that are done from GGC are amazing. We provide phenomenal care, and I sincerely hope that this Scottish Hospitals Inquiry can help us as an organisation move forward, to help us to build public confidence that we have been scrutinised, and to help our public, our patients and our families to believe that we care. I think more than anything, that we care and that we are attempting to do all we can to build their trust, and that our staff feel that it's a place they want to work and they feel proud and supported to do so. That will take time, and I recognise this isn't all achieved in a moment. And then finally, in terms of those recommendations that we've touched on before, if it is possible for the hospital inquiry to consider, I would absolutely fully echo the points around a national surveillance to our high in an e-system, so that they can have that viewpoint across Scotland. Again, potentially noting around the methodology that is required for resolution and restoration, particularly with highly skilled clinical professionals. These issues are really deep and significant in Glasgow, but they are not isolated, and we need to do better to resolve and not leave whistleblowers or others without the appropriate support. And then finally, I come back to the piece I've said already around, if at all possible, from the inquiry, but if not, then I will try out with to support then that national standard for reporting from the built environment, so that the public can see across the landscape and compare our different organisations. But again, my really sincere thanks for this opportunity.
There's a transcript available, so I will be able to read that text
Sorry.
word for word. Seeking to make a different point, the inquiry is very interested in every witness who is able to make a suggestion in relation to recommendations. And I'd be quite interested in having your recommendations in a sort of fully articulated form. Now, one mechanism for that is the closing statement, which I'm going to invite counsel for Greater Glasgow, together with counsel for all the other core participants, to make. I just wonder if there is another mechanism. I'm quite keen to have your precise recommendations.
No, I'm sure that will be, the way it happens is that we, the council team for the inquiry, will lodge our submission by the 21st. And then by the Friday before Christmas, as a Christmas present to our colleagues, they will produce their written submissions. And if you could ensure that you have instructed clarity, and I'm sure once you've instructed clarity will be produced of clear positions that you think should be taken on board as recommendations, we'll receive those. But I had one question.
Yes.
I realised, Professor, that, and now you said what you just said, it focused it in my mind, that I had, in my questions and the questions I've received from the room, focused very much on safety and on questions of acknowledgement or apology. But I've realised I've missed something out, and that is the question of patient-centred care. I think there's a viewpoint, and albeit it's events from 15 to 19, which are well before your time, that perhaps Greater Glasgow and Clyde wasn't sufficiently focused in some respects, not the clinicians, but corporately, in patient-centred care at all times. Is this an area where you're looking at making changes?
I think patient-centred care is probably every second sentence in what we're doing today. And I've tried through the description that I've given to give a greater focus on that piece. We put our people at the very centre, and those we serve, that patient-centric element, what they need from us, so that we understand that both in clinical and indeed in support terms as they go through their journey. So absolutely, it forms part of our strategy and is at the very heart of what we're trying to achieve to give our people, our patients, a better experience, both in terms of the experience that they have and indeed in terms of the care outcomes that they have. So I'm sorry if I've not been more overt in saying that, because actually it's probably like a stick of rock in me. If you were to open what we are talking about as an organisation today, it sits at the very heart for an executive and indeed at board level. That is our primary concern.
Thank you, Malor. I might just look at the room because I did merge a number of questions together, and I want to just check that my mergers have been broadly successful. And I think I'm being given a grudging acknowledgement by my colleagues, so I have no further questions.
Just on this question of patient-centred care, so that I fully understand what we're talking about. One might use the expression patient-centred care in an informal way, which indicates that it's important to speak to, listen to the patient's view of his or her condition and needs. Am I right in thinking that patient-centred care is also almost a technical matter?
Yes.
Probably with a history going back to the 1940s in the United States. In other words, it is a formal concept as no doubt, as well as it might be an informal concept.
Yes, and there's been many iterations over the years, but you're trying to consider what the needs holistically of someone are, in terms of their direct care needs, in terms of technically what they are requiring of you to treat them. And then in that rounded way, that as an organisation that you're looking after all the components that will hook into their care to make sure that, again, the conditions for success are there for them as an individual, and they are there for those who are caring for them. So there's a number of different almost sort of science and psychological sciences that hook around this, including the Scottish Patient Safety Programme and indeed the whole concept of psychological safety for both patients and for staff. So, but at its heart, it's trying to say holistically, what does someone need from this treatment and care episode, and how do we best create the environment in order to deliver that? And how importantly, and that's a theme that has come up through this, are we listening to them and to their families to make sure that we are continuing to get it right? Because just like the elements with the staff, these are not static issues. And that's the challenge in a human environment. What you need today might not be what you need tomorrow when your condition has either improved or declined, etc.
Thank you. Well, as there's no more questions, that's the end of your evidence and you're free to go. But before you do, can I thank you for your attendance today and the preparation for that attendance, the preparing the witness statement and the research and reading that has gone behind that. So you're free to go, but thank you very much.
Sincere thanks. Thank you.
Now, Mr. McIntosh, tomorrow I think is our final day of oral evidence.
And our final witness is Miss Freeman.
And the witness will be Miss Freeman.
Jean Freeman, yes.
Well, can I wish everyone a pleasant evening, and we'll see each other tomorrow.
Stand.